Roguelikes are nothing new to the gaming industry, and they've been one of the biggest genres in gaming for about a decade now. Games like Spelunky and Binding of Isaac brought the genre back into the limelight back in the early 2010s, and since then we've seen a few standout titles, but also a lot of trash. Roguelikes can be relatively easy to make as they rely heavily on repeated runs through randomly generated areas and a lot of random set of items, meaning developers can make a few tile sets, change the art style around a couple of times for variety, come up with a few dozen items, and then call it a day, making this genre prime real estate for small time or even big time developers just looking to make a quick buck. In 2020 though, we've seen a bit of a renaissance in the genre, with amazing titles this year like Hades, Risk of Rain 2, and even the topic of today's video, Gunfire Reborn. Hades this year brought us a whole new way and caliber in which stories can be told in roguelikes, with even the small side characters being insanely fleshed out to the point where I can't even think of a single character that doesn't work in this game. And all of this is not to knock on the gameplay either, which is fast paced and very fun with plenty of weapons and weapon variants to keep it interesting. Though I will say it does feel a bit spammy at times for me, which can make it a bit stale after multiple runs using the same weapon over and over again. And Risk of Rain 2 not only showed people that the developers could take their already winning formula that they had in 2D and perfectly replicate in 3D, but actually improve upon that formula. The game has no story to speak of really, except for some lore tidbits, but its gameplay is damn near perfection in my mind. The way all the items feel useful, and like they're all actively making your character better and stronger, but also you get about halfway through and you'll start to see items working off one another, or allowing for some insane synergies that make you feel like an absolute god. Yet, even when you reach godlike status, the game is still able to be challenging without feeling unfair, and the developers don't have to just bounce around one character. There's about 8 to 10 characters if I recall correctly, and they all look and play completely differently, and yet none feel underpowered or like the items aren't balanced around their playstyles. Risk of Rain 2 has set the bar for unique characters in a roguelike, as well as diverse and actually run-altering items. The only real gripe I have with this game is that after you beat the final boss on the hardest difficulty, there really isn't anything to work towards at this point, and your only option is just see how long you can survive in a run by either becoming so insanely tanky and overpowered that even you can't defeat them, or the more likely option is that just so much shit will be happening at once your PC will just melt and crash your PC. Both Hades and Risk of Rain 2 are not only amazing roguelikes, but just amazing games in general, and will be the standard that all other roguelikes are held to for years to come, similar to how the Binding of Isaac was for so many years before them. With both these games either excelling at story or gameplay in their genre, it's hard to think how any other roguelike this year could compete, but I found myself enjoying Gunfire Reborn just as much as these other two titles, and even found a few things that I feel like it really excelled at as well. But given how much time I just spent talking about the other two games, and how much of the conversation this year is focused on those two games as well, it's pretty obvious to see the answer to the title of this video, and that's just that with two juggernaut games in the roguelike genre already in 1 year, there just simply wasn't any room for a third. But for the rest of this video, I'd like to explain to you why sleeping on this game is one in the long list of travesties of 2020. Now that I've spent enough time talking about other games and dangling the carrot in front of you for long enough, let me actually tell you what it's like to play Gunfire Reborn.
Cameron, you should not be familiar with that game.
Why not? Not sure why. Jellyfish are coming.
If I had to make a quick comparison, I would say Gunfire shares a lot with Borderlands, as they both share the randomly generated gun aspect, as well as the different character abilities that you can choose from, to the point where they blatantly copy the Gunzerker ability from Borderlands 2. At the start, you have to start with the first character, Cat Dude is what I'll call him, but as you unlock more levels in the game, you'll eventually unlock two others, which is Dogman and Bird Bitch, and the developers had stated they'll add more in the future as the game's still in early access. Now the cat has an energy ball that he shoots and locks whatever enemy he hits in place for a few seconds, as well as dealing damage to them. The second character, the dog, is the Gunzerker copy that I referenced earlier, as he can shoot both of his guns at the same time. And the bird, who is the final character that you unlock, has a leap where he charges at enemies and kicks them to refill his armor. All three of these characters are really unique in their abilities, look, and gameplay styles, which I'll go into more depth later. The only problem I have with the current way the characters are unlocked though is that you have to play all three characters in a specific order, as you only unlock the Gunzerker and the bird character after you've leveled up enough on the skill tree that you share between runs, meaning you're stuck playing the first character for the first few hours, and if his abilities and playstyle don't align with how you play this type of game, then it could turn you off from the game before you even have time to unlock the other characters. I think it would have been much more beneficial to have all the characters unlocked from the start, and you just let the player pick which one they like the best, so that they can find which one fits how they like to play from the start, rather than having them struggle through hours of unenjoyable runs since they can't play how they want to. The current method is so much more rigid and limits the player's choice, in my opinion. Now, the whole reason I said this way of character progression and unlocks doesn't work is also why I feel is a bit of a contentious part of the game's design, and that's its progression outside of the runs themselves. Some roguelikes let the players upgrade stats or unlock new abilities and weapons between runs, and these act as permanent boosts to the player, so in theory the player will always be getting more powerful after each run. This can be beneficial because it always gives the player something to work towards, and also makes the repeated deaths more bearable since the player will always be able to get a reward every time they die, instead of feeling like you lost absolutely everything when you die. On the other hand though, this form of progression in a roguelike means that in the early hours of the game, the player will be super weak, and it's almost impossible for the player to make any meaningful progress to the end until you die at least a few times, so you can upgrade your character enough to be able to make it further in the runs. Now, I personally fall into the second group of players, as I'm not a fan of this form of progression in roguelikes. I feel roguelikes should be about skill and learning all the mechanics have to offer until you get good enough to master the game and make it to the end. But with this constant progression through runs with simple stat boosts or locking of essential aspects of the gameplay loop, you can essentially eventually brute force your way through this game, as your stats and abilities will get so strong that you can make many of the early stages quite a joke. Though I will say, in defense of the game, it does have multiple difficulty modes in which the higher ones really require you to think about what upgrades and guns you're taking into your runs, but I still would have preferred a progression system like Risk of Rain 2, where you only really unlock new items, but if you're skilled enough at the game, you can theoretically beat that game on its very first run. Is it likely? No, but it's possible, and that's how I like roguelikes. Like I said though, I feel all of this is pretty subjective, and every player's going to feel differently about the progression and whether or not they like it or not, but personally I was not a fan of it. But on the flip side, I think the progression you experience in the runs themselves is phenomenal and really allows for a lot of player expression and flexibility. Each character has their own skill trees that you upgrade every run, and this is where the player can really customize how they like to play. Each character has 3 of these trees, all focusing on a different style of play. Roughly, they focus on upgrading the player's ability, grenades, or the guns, but how they're changed and upgraded vary for each character. You're allowed to upgrade one of these skills in one of these trees at the end of each stage in a level. All of these upgrades really give you tangible and substantial changes in each run and really give you a sense that you're getting stronger as you're progressing. The only complaint that I have with the skill trees is that it's random what skills you can upgrade at the end of each level. You're given 3 options on what you can upgrade, but it's completely random on what these 3 will be. This is a real problem as it can severely limit being able to play the playstyle you want to play. Like if you want to focus on making your grenades super powerful, but the game keeps giving you skills that upgrade your ability, then there isn't really anything you can do about this, and either you change your playstyle for that run to focus on your ability, or you severely handicap yourself by still playing around your grenades, and you're just going to be feeling super underpowered by the later levels in the game. As far as the moment-to-moment gameplay goes, it's not really anything especially innovative or life-changing, but it's fun, and with friends it can be especially fun to see what insane combos you can make with each other's abilities and different guns. And yes, you heard me right, this game has 4-player co-op, and it's honestly one of the best co-op implementations I've seen in a roguelike game. The game has a co-op scaling, meaning that it's not a straight steamroll by having more players, but you also don't get screwed by just inviting one person to your party. The best godsend to the co-op though is that all the loot is instant based, meaning you don't have to fight your friends for a gun, but you can share your loot with them with a single button press. And regardless, by playing with more people, you're effectively getting more loot for free as each player gets guns at the same time, but every person will get their own version, so you can get up to 4 times the loot just by playing with your friends. The co-op also means that you can go down and it's not immediately game over, as you can be revived an infinite amount of times, though each time you do bleed out quicker and quicker, meaning that by a certain point, unless they're literally right next to you, it'll become impossible to get to you in time. If you do bleed out though, they can buy you back at the next shop for a pretty hefty sum of gold. The revives really help to get way further into the game than what would be possible solo, and I've actually only ever gotten to the final boss when in co-op. Though that's mostly because I almost exclusively play the game in co-op, so maybe if I didn't play the game with friends so often I would learn to adapt to the solo playstyle, but as it stands, the co-op is an absolute lifesaver. Another huge highlight of the game is the guns, but they're also coincidentally one of the biggest missed opportunities. Like I said earlier, the guns are similar to Borderlands in that they're randomly generated in stats, but they don't have random appearances like Borderlands, as all the pump shotguns will look and sound the same, and it's just the stats that are randomly generated. Early in the game, you really only see stats like rate of fire, recoil, and stability being tweaked, which really aren't that cool, but by the end, you can see some pretty crazy modifiers, like crits returning bullets to the magazine, or if the first shot in the gun doesn't kill, then the second does massive amounts of bonus damage. And by the last level in the game, you can even start to find guns with things called Gemini inscriptions, which mean that if both your guns share the same Gemini inscription, then the inscription becomes active, and these inscriptions are the most drastic changes and also the most broken, so you pretty much always want to go for these whenever possible. These inscriptions can allow for both guns to share magazine sizes, meaning that if you have a full auto shotgun and a minigun with this inscription, then the full auto shotgun can have upwards of 100 bullets in its magazine, and that's on top of any other inscriptions the gun already has on it, meaning these things can make guns absolutely busted. Some other Gemini inscriptions can also include things like spawning spores on enemies when they're hit, or combining both guns' crit scores, resulting in crits sometimes doing upwards of 8 to 9 times their normal damage. Honestly, I just wish the developers had taken the inscriptions even further. The super rare inscriptions and the Gemini inscriptions are the best part of the loot game for this game, and you don't even really start to see those frequently until the last level of the game, which just makes a lot of those early stages even more of a slog, even a few hours into the game. So honestly, I think the game should have just gone full balls to the wall with the modifiers, as it would really help the same gun feel more unique each time you found one, and give you more reason to inspect every version of the same weapon that's dropped, rather than just looking to see if it has an orange or purple inscription, and if not, then not even bothering with it. Like, imagine if you could find the same machine gun, but one shot bullets that could pierce through walls, and the other could cause small explosions on impact. Neither is inherently bad as a modifier, and it's more up to how the player wants to play rather than the best stats, which would just really help further with player choice in each individual run and help from the guns feeling samey after a few runs. Now, this game doesn't have items per se, and instead has scrolls which give you all the effects and changes you would expect, like more ammo capacity, faster shield recharging, and lifesteal, but the scrolls in this game also get pretty crazy and interesting and aren't always just straight up upgrades. Some of the crazier scrolls can fundamentally change your run, like making you immune to a certain type of damage or doing more crit damage but less normal damage, and I like this as scrolls can feel really useful and impactful in every run. Some of these scrolls can sort of be side grades too, like having all your health converted into your shield, or more damage dealt but also more damage taken. Having scrolls like these doesn't sound that impactful or important, but it really helps with player knowledge and awareness of scrolls, as if you're just mindlessly picking up scrolls, you can really end up shooting yourself in the foot and actually make the game harder for yourself. Because of this, I'm far more aware of all the different scrolls that I can find and which ones I like and which ones I don't, instead of just blindly picking them all up like in a lot of the more generic roguelikes. All the things that I've been talking about are ways in which I feel that Gunfire Reborn broke free of the traditional roguelike mold and carved its own interesting and unique path in the genre, but the game also plays it really safe in other regards. For instance, the level design is super basic and repetitive in my opinion. The levels are usually just semi-open areas with some obstacles for cover and set dressing. Level design doesn't have to be superb in a roguelike, but this just felt like we went back to the Binding of Isaac era of roguelikes, where every game was just generic rooms repeated over and over again. Also, the actual visual design of the different levels isn't very unique. You have generic looking dungeon / tomb, generic Middle Eastern desert location, and finally Pacific Island water location. The art from a technical standpoint is fine for all three locations, but there just isn't enough imagination to them in my opinion, and I never felt like, wow, that was a really cool looking area. Whereas Risk of Rain 2 has multiple interesting alien locations that all feel unique and interesting to explore, and the final boss area in particular is just amazing. And then Hades also has multiple unique locations you visit as you fight your way through the underworld. So for a year with 2 heavy hitters, just okay isn't enough anymore. Now, when all these aspects of the game, the player progression, the guns, and the scrolls all come together, it can be an amazing experience, as not only are your player upgrades working off each other, but your scrolls and guns are worked together all in conjunction to make this well-oiled machine of the gameplay that delivers an experience that's honestly just as good as the games that I was talking about at the beginning of this video. And for a game from a small indie company in China, which also happens to be their first public release, that's saying a lot, but I can't help but feel that this feeling of togetherness with all these systems isn't achieved as often as I feel that it should or could have. I think the real issue I have with this game is that I almost never felt like I got a god run like you can get in all the other roguelikes. This game always feels like you're barely getting by or only slightly strong. I pretty much never went, holy shit, nothing can touch me, which I think is really important to have in a roguelike, and a big reason people play the genre. People always say one more run because there's always that possibility of getting that god tier run where you get every item and upgrade you want and everything works perfectly in your favor, and I just never had that feeling with this game. Like, I'm not saying runs have to be Risk of Rain 2 levels of broken and OP, but like, I probably went into the final boss more times feeling like I was about to get my shit kicked in than going in thinking I was gonna demolish him. This brings up a bigger issue too, which is just the overall difficulty scaling of this game, especially in the most recent updates. This game has already one of the harder roguelikes out there, and not one where you can just consistently win over and over again, but I could at least consistently get to the last level of the game, and often the final boss. But with the most recent update or two, the game seems to be exponentially harder to the point where I can't even beat the final boss on the normal difficulty at level 60 or so, where previously I'd beaten the final boss on the hard difficulty. I think this also is compounded by a few enemy types that are just way too overtuned in their health, damage, or both. For instance, the sniper enemies that are in every level of the game, they can often one or two shot you if you're not careful, and they can even shoot multiple shots at once, sometimes meaning you can die in a single burst of damage that you didn't even see coming. Or there are these massive tank-like enemies that start to appear in the second and final level of the game, and they have massive amounts of armor and health that take multiple clips to kill, all the while all the other fodder enemies are just wailing away at you. And this isn't to discount the damage these bullet sponges can put out either, as they can often kill you just as fast, or sometimes even faster than the regular enemies. Enemies are allowed to be tough, don't get me wrong, and I don't expect them to be brainless meatbags, but so many of the enemies in this game feel tough for all the wrong reasons. Gunfire is very RNG based, just like most roguelikes are, but this one feels more so than others. Like, if you don't get the right guns and upgrades early on, it's just going to be a constant struggle to survive even the early stages. Now, if you're one of the people watching this video because you're genuinely curious about giving it a shot, then I would definitely say it's worth the money, especially since it's only $12 US, which is an absolute steal in my opinion for the amount of quality content you're getting here. Also, like I've briefly mentioned, this game is still in early access, and they've laid out a roadmap for the rest of the content they plan to release till then, and when that content will drop, and it all seems promising and will only build upon the things that already make this game interesting and fun, and they may even be able to fix some of the issues I had with this game, like the difficulty scaling, by the time the game comes to full release. The roguelike genre is quite the oversaturated market right now, as I feel like a new one is coming out every week or so, and most are utter garbage and blatant cash grabs, but every once in a while you find a gem in the bunch that really show you what the genre can be. It's rare these days that even one roguelike a year is released that has any kind of staying power, let alone 3 all in 1 year. Risk of Rain 2 and Hades have far eclipsed this game in the gaming news and awards, and will likely cause this game to be buried in the sea of games over time, but I don't think that means that people should skip out on this gem, as it's a really fun experience, if a bit flawed. Thank you guys so much once again for taking the time to watch the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like as it really helps me out, and if you dislike the video, be sure to dislike it and let me know what I can do better in future videos. Subscribe for more videos like this one. I'll see you guys next time.